Welcome everyone to Storybook Mondays. This is the show where we read some books for you guys at different reading levels every week. So today we're going to be continuing on with Winnie-the-Pooh. It's kind of like a little bit of a chapter book with some pictures in it. Alright, so last week we finished chapter 2, so we're going to be continuing on with chapter 3. Alright. So, Chapter 3. Yeah, a game stand. That's just my PC. Alright. Yeah, I played it a little bit. Yep. Alright, but right now we're going to focus on our reading stand. So, Chapter 3, in which Pooh and Piglet go hunting and nearly catch a woozle. The piglet lived in a very grand house in the middle of a beech tree, and the beech tree was in the middle of a forest, and Piglet lived in the middle of the house. Next to his house was a piece of broken board which had Trespassers W on it. When Christopher Robin asked what it meant, he said it meant his grandfather's name and had been in their family a long time. Christopher Robin said you couldn't be called Trespassers W, and Piglet said yes, you could, because his grandfather was, and it was short for Trespassers Will, which was short for Trespassers William, and his grandfather had two names in case he lost one, Trespassers after an uncle and William after Trespassers. Interesting. Let me get that off. Okay. I've got two names, said Christopher Robin carelessly. Well, there you are. That proves it, said Piglet. One fine winter's day, when Piglet was brushing away the snow in front of his house, he happened to look up, and there was Winnie-the-Pooh. Pooh was walking round and round in circles, thinking of... Oops. Let me turn the page. There we go. Thinking of something else, and when Piglet called to him, he just went on walking. Hello, said Piglet. What are you doing? Hunting, said Pooh. Hunting what? Tracking something, said Winnie-the-Pooh very mysteriously. Tracking what? Said Piglet, coming closer. That's just what I asked myself. I asked myself, what? What do you think you'll answer? I shall have to wait until I catch up with it, said Winnie-the-Pooh. Now look there. He pointed to the ground in front of him. What do you see there? Tracks, said Piglet. Paw marks. He gave it a low squeak of excitement. Oh, Pooh, do you think it's a woozle? It may be, said Pooh. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. You can never tell with paw marks. I have a feeling you know where this is going. I think he's following his own footprints. Alright, with these few words, he went on tracking, and Piglet, after watching him for a minute or two, ran after him. Winnie-the-Pooh had come to a sudden stop and was bending over the tracks. Hello, Nasser. Was bending over the tracks in a puzzled sort of way. What's the matter? Said Piglet. It's a very funny thing, said Bear. But there seems to be two animals now. This, whatever it is, has been joined by another, whatever it is, and two of them are now proceeding in company. What do you mean, coming with me, Piglet? Would you mind coming with me, Piglet, in case they turn out to be hostile animals? Piglet scratched his ear in a nice sort of way and said he had nothing to do until Friday and would be delighted to come in case it really was a woozle. You mean in case it really is two woozles, said Winnie-the-Pooh. And Piglet said that anyhow he had nothing to do until Friday, so off they went together. There was a small spiny of large trees just there, and it seemed as if two woozles, if that is what they were, had been going round this spinny. So round this spinny went Pooh and Piglet after them. Piglet passing the time by telling Pooh what his grandfather Trespasser's W had done to remove stiffness after tracking, and how his grandfather Trespasser W had suffered in the later years from shortness of breath and other matters of interest. And Pooh, wondering what a grandfather was like, and if perhaps it was two grandfathers they were after now, and if so, whether he would be allowed to take one home and keep it, and what Christopher Robin would say. And still the tracks went on in front of them. Suddenly, Winnie-the-Pooh stopped and pointed excitedly in front of him. "Look!" "What?" said Piglet, with a jump, and then, to show what he hadn't been frightened, he jumped up and down once or twice in an exercising sort of way. "The tracks," said Pooh. "A third animal has joined the other two." Okay, interesting. "Pooh!" cried Piglet. "Do you think there is another woozle?" "No," said Pooh, "because it makes different marks. It is either two woozles and one, as it might be whizzle, or two, as it might be whizzles and one. If so, it is woozle. Let us continue to follow them." So they went on, feeling just a little anxious now, in case the three animals in front of them were of hostile intent, and Piglet wished very much that his grandfather T.W. were there instead of elsewhere. And Pooh thought how nice it would be if they met Christopher Robin suddenly, but quite accidentally, and only because he liked Christopher Robin so much. And then all of a sudden, Winnie-the-Pooh stopped again and licked at the top of his nose in a cooling manner, for he was feeling more hot and anxious than ever in his life before. There were 4 animals in front of them. "Do you see, Piglet? Look at the tracks. 3 as it were woozles, for 1 as it was whizzle. Another woozle has joined them." And so it seemed to be. There were the tracks crossing each other, over each other, getting muddled up with each other, but quite plainly every now and then the tracks of 4 set of paws. "I think," said Piglet, when he licked the top of his nose too, and found that brought very little comfort, "I think that I have just remembered something. I've just remembered something that I forgot to do yesterday, and I shan't be able to do tomorrow, so I suppose I really ought to go back and do it now." "We'll do it this afternoon, and I'll come with you," said Pooh. "It isn't the sort of thing that you can do in the afternoon," said Piglet. "It is a very particular morning thing, and has to be done in the morning, and if possible, between the hours of—" What would you say the time was?" "About 12, said Winnie-the-Pooh, looking at the sun. "Between, as I was saying, the hours of 12 and 12:05. So really, dear old Pooh, if you'll excuse me—" "What's that?" Pooh looked up in the sky, and then, as he heard the whistle again, he looked up into the branch of the big oak tree, and then he saw his friend. "It's Christopher Robin," he said. "And then you'll be all right," said Piglet. "You'll be quite safe with him. Goodbye." And he trotted off home as quickly as he could, very glad to be out of all the danger again. Christopher Robin came slowly down his tree. "Silly old bear," he said, "what were you doing? First you went round the spiny all by yourself, and then Piglet ran after you, and you went round again together, and then you were just going round a 4th time." "Wait a minute," said Winnie-the-Pooh, holding up his paw. He sat down and thought, in the most thoughtful way he could think. Then he fit his paw into one of the tracks, and then he scratched his nose twice and stood up. "Yes," said Winnie-the-Pooh. "I see now," said Winnie-the-Pooh. "I've been foolish and deluded," said he, "and I am a bear of no brain at all." "You're the best bear in all the world," said Christopher Robin soothingly. "Am I?" said Pooh hopefully, and then he brightened up suddenly. "Anyhow," he said, It is nearly luncheon time, and he went home for it. Wow, that was a fast chapter. Alright, chapter 4. Eeyore loses a tail and Pooh finds one. The old gray donkey Eeyore stood by himself in a thistly corner of the forest, his front feet well apart, his head on one side, and thought about things. Sometimes he thought sadly to himself, why? And sometimes he thought, wherefore? And sometimes he thought, I'm such a as which? And sometimes he didn't quite know what he was thinking about. So when Winnie-the-Pooh came stumping along, Eeyore was very glad to be able to stop thinking for a little while in order to say, "How do you do?" in a gloomy manner to him. "And how are you?" said Winnie-the-Pooh. Eeyore shook his head from side to side. "Not very how," he said. "I don't seem to have felt at all how for a long time." "Dear, dear," said Pooh, "I'm sorry about that. Let's have a look at you." So Eeyore stood there, gazing sadly at the ground, and Winnie-the-Pooh walked around him once. "Why, what happened to your tail?" he said in his surprise. "What has happened to it?" said Eeyore. "It isn't there? Are you sure?" "Well, either a tail is or isn't there. You can't make a mistake about it, and yours isn't there. Then, what is it?" "Nothing." "Let's have a look," said Eeyore, and he turned around slowly round to the place where his tail had been a little while ago, and then finding that he couldn't catch it up, he turned around the other way until he came back to where he was at first, and then he put his head down and looked between his front legs, and at last he said, with a long sigh, "I believe you're right." "Of course I'm right," said Pooh. "That accounts for a good deal," said Eeyore gloomily. "It explains everything. No wonder." "You must have left it somewhere," said Winnie-the-Pooh. "Somebody must have taken it," said Eeyore. "How like them," he added. After a long silence, Pooh felt he ought to say something helpful about it, but didn't quite know what, so he decided to do something helpful instead. "Eeyore," he said solemnly, "I, Winnie-the-Pooh, will find your tail for you." "Thank you, Pooh," answered Eeyore. "You're a real friend," he said. "Not like some," he said. So Winnie-the-Pooh went off to find Eeyore's tail. So it was a fine spring morning in the forest as he started out. Little soft clouds played happily in a blue sky, skipping from time to time in front of the sun as if they had come to put it out, and then sliding away suddenly so that the next might have his turn. Through them and between them the sun shone bravely, and a corpse which had worn its furs all the year round seemed old and dowdy now beside the new green lace which had the breeches had put on so prettily. Through copse and spiny marched Bear, down open slopes of gorse and heather, over rocky beds of streams, up steep banks and sandstone into the heather again, and so at last, tired and hungry, to the 100-acre wood, for it was in the 100-acre wood the owl lived. And if anyone knows anything about anything, said Bear himself, it's Owl who knows something about something, he said. Or my name is not Winnie-the-Pooh, he said, which it is, he added. So there you are. Owl lived in the Chestnuts, an old world residence of great charm, which was grander than anybody else's, or it seemed so to Bear, because it had both a knocker and a bell pull. Underneath the knocker there was a notice which said, "Please ring if an answer is required." Alright. Underneath the bell pull There was another notice which said, "Please knock if an answer is not required." These notices had been written by Christopher Robin, who was the only one in force who could spell. For Owl, wise though he was funny, he was in many ways able to read and write and spell his own name, Wool, yet somehow went all to pieces over delicate words like measles and buttered toast. And as you can see on the right is a picture of Winnie-the-Pooh visiting his friend Owl's house. Winnie-the-Pooh read the two notices very carefully, first from left to right and afterwards, in case he had missed some of it, from right to left. Then, to make quite sure, he knocked and pulled the knocker, and he pulled the knocked the bell rope, and he called out in a very loud voice, "Owl, I require an answer, it's Bear speaking." And the door opened and Owl looked out. "Hello, Pooh," he said. "How's things?" "Trouble and sad," said Pooh, "because Eeyore, who is a friend of mine, lost his tail, and he's moping about it. So could you very kindly tell me how to find it for him?" "Well," Owl said, "the customary procedure in such cases is as follows." "What does crustamony proceed cake mean?" said Pooh, "for I am a bear of very little brain, and long words bother me." "It means the things to do. As long as it means that, I don't mind," said Pooh humbly. "The thing to do is as follows. First, issue a reward. Then," "Just a moment," said Pooh, holding up his paw. What do we do to this? What were we saying?" "What you were saying? You sneezed just as you were going to tell me." "I didn't sneeze." "Yes, you did, Owl." "Excuse me, Pooh, I didn't." "You can't sneeze without knowing it." "Well, you can't know it without something having been sneezed." "What I said was, first issue a reward." "You're doing it again," said Pooh. "A reward," said Owl very loudly. "We write a notice to say that we will give a large something to anybody who finds Eeyore's tail." I see, said Pooh, nodding his head. "Talking about large somethings," he went on dreamily, "I generally have a small something about this time in the morning," and he looked wistfully at the cupboard in the corner of Owl's parlor, just a mouthful of condensed milk or whatnot, with perhaps a lick of honey. "Well then," said Owl, "and we write out this notice and we put it all over the forest." "A lick of honey," murmured Bear to himself, or not, as the case may be, and he gave a deep sigh and tried very hard to listen to what Owl was saying, but Owl went on and on, using longer and longer words, until at last he came to where he started and explained that the person to write out this notice was Christopher Robin. "It was he who wrote the ones on my front door for me. Did you see them, Pooh?" For some time now, Pooh had been saying yes and no, in turn, with his eyes shut, to all that Owl was saying, and having said yes last time, he said no, not at all, now, without really knowing what Owl was talking about. "Didn't you see them?" said Owl, a little surprised. "Come and look at them now." So they went outside, and Pooh looked at the knocker and noticed below it, and he looked at the bell rope and the notice below it, and the more he looked at the bell rope, the more he felt like he had seen something like that before, somewhere else, some time before. "Handsome bell rope, isn't it?" said Owl. Pooh nodded. "It sometimes reminds me of something," he said, "but I can't think what." "Where did you get it?" "I just came across it in the forest." "Oh man, that is Eeyore's tail." "Alright, I just came across it in the forest. It was hanging over a bush, and I thought at first somebody lived there, so I rang it, and nothing happened. And then I rang it again very loudly, and it came off in my hand." Ay, that is Eeyore's tail right there. As nobody seemed to want it, I took it home. And, Owl, Pooh said solemnly, you made a mistake. Someone did want it. Who? Eeyore, my dear friend Eeyore. He was, he was fond of it. Fond of it? Attached to it, said Pooh sadly. So with these words, he unhooked it and carried it back to Eeyore, and when Christopher Robin had nailed it on in its right place again, Eeyore frisked about the forest, waving his tail so happily that Winnie-the-Pooh came over all funny and had to hurry home with a little snack of something to sustain him, and wiping his mouth, half an hour afterwards he sang to himself proudly. Who found the tail? I, said Pooh, at 1:45. Only it was 11:15, really. I found the tail. That is funny, I didn't know Eeyore's tail was detachable. Yes, very interesting pictures. Alright, we're gonna do, hopefully we can finish this one last chapter, chapter 5. Piglet meets a heffalump. One day when Christopher Robin and Winnie-the-Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carefully, I saw a heffalump today, Piglet. What was it doing? Said Piglet. Just lumping around, said Christopher Robin. I don't think it saw me. I saw one once, said Piglet. At least, I think I did, he said. Only perhaps it wasn't. So did I, said Pooh, wondering what a heffalump was like. You don't often see them, said Christopher Robin carelessly. Not now, said Piglet. Not at this time of year, said Pooh. Then they all talked about something else until it was time for Pooh and Piglet to go home together. At first, as they stumped along the path which edged the 100-acre wood, they didn't say much to each other, but when they came to the stream and had helped each other cross the stepping stones and were able to walk side by side again over the over the heather, they began to talk in a friendly way about this and that, and Piglet said, If you see what I mean, Pooh? And Pooh said, It's just what I think myself, Piglet. And Piglet said, But, on the other hand, Pooh, we must remember. And Pooh said, Quite true, Piglet, and I thought I had forgotten it for the moment. And then, just as they came to the 6 pine trees, Pooh looked round to see that nobody else was listening, and said in a very solemn voice, Piglet, I have decided something. What have you decided, Pooh? I've decided to catch a heffalump. Pooh nodded his head several times as he said this, and waited for Piglet to say how. Or Pooh, you couldn't, or something helpful of that sort, but Piglet said nothing. The fact was, Piglet was wishing that he had thought about it first. I shall do it, said Pooh, after waiting a little longer, by means of a trap, and it must be a cunning trap, so you will have to help me, Piglet. Pooh, said Piglet, feeling quite happy again now, I will. And then he said, How shall we do it? And Pooh said, That's just it, how? And then they sat together to think it out. Pooh's first idea was that they should dig a very deep pit, and then a heffalump would come along and fall into the pit. And why? said Piglet. Why what? said Pooh. Why would he fall in? Pooh rubbed his nose with his paw and said that a heffalump might be walking along, humming a little song and looking up at the sky, wondering if it would rain, and so he wouldn't see the very deep pit until he was halfway down, when it would be too late. Piglet said that this was a very good trap, but supposing it was raining already? Pooh rubbed his nose again and said that he hadn't thought of that. And then he brightened up and said that if it were raining already, the heffalump would be looking at the sky wondering if it would clear up, and so he wouldn't see the very deep pit until he was halfway down, when it would be too late. Piglet said that now that this point had been explained, he thought it was a cunning trap. Pooh was very proud when he heard this, and he He felt that Heffalump was as good as caught already. But there he was, just one more thing which had to be thought about, and it was this. Where shall they dig this very deep pit? Piglet said that the best place would be somewhere where Heffalump was just before he fell into it, only about a foot further on. But then he said he would see us digging it, said Pooh. Not if he was looking at the sky. He would suspect, said Pooh. If he happened to look down, he thought very long time, and then added sadly, "It isn't as easy as I thought. I suppose that's why Heffalumps hardly ever get caught." "That must be it," said Piglet. They sighed and got up, and when they had taken a few gorse prickles out of themselves, they sat down again, and all the time Pooh was saying to himself, "If only I could think of something." For he felt sure that a very clever brain could catch a Heffalump if only he knew the right way to go about it. "Suppose," he said to Piglet, "you wanted to catch me. How would you do it?" "Well," said Piglet, "I should do it like this. I should make a trap, and I should put a jar of honey in the trap, and you would smell it, and you would go in after it, and I would go in after it," said Pooh excitedly, "only very carefully so as not to hurt myself, and I would get the jar of honey, and I shall lick around the edges, first of all, pretending that there wasn't any more, and then I should walk away and think about it a little, and then I should come back and start licking the middle of the jar, and then, yes, well, never mind about that. There you would be, and there I should catch you. Now the first thing to think is, what do Heffalumps like? I should think acorns, shouldn't you? We'll get a lot of... I say, wake up, Pooh." Pooh, who had gone into a happy dream, woke up with a start and said that honey was much more trappy thing than acorns. Piglet didn't think so, and they were just going to argue about it when Piglet remembered if they put acorns in the trap, he would have to find the acorns, but if they put honey, Pooh would have to give up some of his own honey. So he said, "All right, honey then," just as Pooh remembered it too, and was going to say, "All right, acorns." "Honey," said Piglet to himself in a thoughtful way, as if it were now settled. "I'll dig the pit while you go get the honey." "Very well," said Pooh, and he stumped off. As soon as he got home, he went to the larder, and he stood on a chair, and he took down a very large jar of honey from the top shelf. It had honey written on it, but just to make sure, he took off the paper cover and looked at it, and looked just like honey, but "You can never tell," said Pooh. "I remember my uncle saying once that he had seen cheese just this color." So he put his tongue in and took a large lick. "Yes," he said, "it is no doubt about it, and honey, I should say, right down to the bottom of the jar. Unless, of course," he said, "somebody put cheese at the bottom just for a joke. Perhaps I had better go a little further, just in case Heffalumps don't like cheese, same as me. Ah." And he gave a deep sigh. "I was right. It is honey, right the way down." Having made certain of it, he took the jar back to Piglet, and Piglet looked up from the bottom of the very deep pit and said, "Got it?" And Pooh said, "Yes, but it isn't quite a full jar," and he threw it down to Piglet, and Piglet said, "No, it isn't." "Is that all you've got left?" And Pooh said, "Yes," because it was. So Piglet put the jar at the bottom of the pit and climbed out, and they went off home together. "Well, good night, Pooh," said Piglet, and when they had got to Pooh's house, and "We met at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning by the pine trees, and see how many Heffalumps we got in our trap." 6 o'clock, Piglet. And have you got any string?" "No." "Why do you want string?" "To lead them home with." "Oh, I think Heffalumps come if you whistle. So do, and some don't. You can never tell with Heffalumps. Well, good night. Good night. And off Piglet trotted to his house, trespassers W, while Pooh made his preparations for bed. Some hours later, just as the night was beginning to steal away, Pooh woke up suddenly with a sinking feeling. He had had that sinking feeling before, and he knew what it meant. He was hungry. So he went up to the larder and he stood on a chair and reached up the top shelf and found nothing. That's funny, he thought. I know I had a jar of honey there, a full jar full of honey right at the top, and it had honey written on it, so that I should know it was honey. That's very funny. And then he began to wander up and down, wondering where it was, murmuring a murmur to himself like this. It's very, very funny, 'cause I know I had some honey, 'cause I had a label on saying honey. A galopterous full pot too, and now I don't know where it's got to. Now I don't know where it's gone. Well, it's funny. He had murmured this to himself 3 times in a singing sort of way when suddenly he remembered he had put it into a cunning trap to catch the heffalump. Bother, said Pooh. It all comes of trying to be kind to heffalumps. And he got back into bed. He couldn't sleep. The more he tried to sleep, the more he couldn't. He tried counting sheep, which is sometimes a good way of getting to sleep, as that was no good. He tried counting heffalumps, and that was worse, because every heffalump that he counted was making straight for a pot of Pooh's honey and eating it all. And for some minutes he lay there miserably, while when the 587th heffalump was licking his paws and saying to himself, "Very good honey, this. I don't know where I've tasted better." A heffalump looks like a elephant. Interesting. Pooh could bear it no longer. He jumped out of bed. He ran out of the house, and he ran straight to 6 pine trees. The sun was still abed, but there was a lightness in the sky over the 100-acre wood, which seemed to show that it was waking up and would soon be kicking off its clothes. In the half light, the pine trees looked cold and lonely, and the very deep pit seemed deeper than it was, and Pooh's jar of honey at the bottom was something mysterious. A shape and no more. But as he got nearer to his nose and told him that it was indeed honey, and his tongue came out and began to, said Pooh, and he got his nose inside the jar, a heffalump has been eating it. And then he thought a little and said, "Oh, no, I did. I forgot." Indeed, he had eaten most of it, but there was a little left at the very bottom of the jar, and then he pushed his head right in and began to lick. By and by, Piglet woke up, and as soon as he woke, he said to himself, "Oh." Then he said bravely, "Yes," and then he said still more bravely, "Quite so," but he didn't feel very brave, for the word which was really jittering about in his brain was heffalumps. What was a heffalump like? Was it fierce? Did it come when you whistled? And how did it come? Was it fond of pigs at all? If it was fond of pigs, did it make any difference what sort of pig? Supposing it was fierce with pigs, would it make any difference if the pig had a grandfather called Trespassers William? He didn't know the answer to any of these questions, and he was going to see the first heffalump in about an hour from now. Of course, Pooh would be with him, and it was much more friendly with 2. But suppose heffalumps were very fierce with pigs and bears. Wouldn't it be better to pretend that he had a headache and couldn't go up to 6 pine trees this morning? But then he supposed that it was a very fine day and there was no heffalump in the trap. Here he would be in bed all morning, simply wasting his time for nothing. What should he do? And then he had a clever idea. He would go up very quietly to the 6 pine trees now, peep very cautiously into the trap, and see if there was a heffalump there. And if there was, he would go back into bed, and if there wasn't, he wouldn't. So off he went, and he thought, at first he thought that there wouldn't be a heffalump in the trap, and then he thought there would. And as he got nearer, he was sure that there would, but because he could hear it heffalomping about like anything. Oh dear, said Piglet to himself, and he wanted to run away. But somehow, having got so near, he felt that he must see what a heffalump looked like. So he crept to the side of the trap and looked in. And all the time Winnie-the-Pooh had been trying to get the honey jar off his head. The more he shook it, and the more tightly it stuck. Bother, he said inside the jar, and oh help, and ow. And he tried bumping it against things, but as he couldn't see what he was bumping it against, it didn't help. And he tried to climb out of the trap, but as he couldn't see nothing but jar, and not much of that, he couldn't find his way. So at last he lifted his head and jar and all, and made a loud roaring noise of sadness and despair. And it was at that moment that Piglet looked down. Help, help, cried Piglet. A heffalump, a horrible heffalump. And he scampered off as hard as he could, still crying out, help, help, a horrible heffalump. Huff, huff, a heffalump. Hull, hull, huff, huffable hellicrump. And he didn't stop crying and scampering until he got to Christopher Robin's house. What's the matter, Piglet? Said Christopher Robin, who was just getting up. Hef, said Piglet, breathing so hard that he could hardly speak. A heffalump. Where? Up there, said Piglet, waving his paw. What did it look like? Like it had the biggest head you ever saw, Christopher Robin. A great enormous thing, like nothing, a huge big, well, like a, I don't know, like an enormous big nothing, like a jar. Well, said Christopher Robin, putting on his shoes, I shall go and look at it. Come on. Piglet wasn't afraid if he had Christopher Robin with him, so off they went. I can hear it, can't you? Said Piglet anxiously as he got near. I can hear something, said Christopher Robin. It was Pooh bopping his head against the tree root he had found. There, said Piglet, isn't it awful? And he held on tight to Christopher Robin's hand. Suddenly, Christopher Robin began to laugh and laugh, and he laughed and he laughed. And while he was still laughing, crash went the heffalum's head against the tree root. Smash went the jar and came out Pooh's head again. Then Piglet saw what a foolish piglet he had been, and he was so ashamed of himself that he ran straight off home and went to bed with a headache. But Christopher Robin and Pooh went home to breakfast together. Oh, Bear, said Christopher Robin, how do I love you? So do I, said Pooh. So we're going to call it there, and we will resume chapter 6 next time on Storybook Mondays. So thank you all for joining me, and we will see you next time. Alright, take care and be safe.